I think that it can be very intimidating for teachers to think that, oh, anyone can see what I'm put down here, and that can be the end for them. They're just not willing to do that, or to put themselves out there. And I get that. But I like to tell teachers that this process of creating a blog post about your lesson or something, even if it's just like things that you like, you can still do that on a blog and make the blog private just for you. And you still go through that process and you still have all that information. You don't necessarily have to share it out with everyone. Maybe you'll get to that point where you'll feel comfortable with it. But honestly, the process alone is the thing that's important. I think
you're listening to our good friend and colleague, David Petro. David is the math coordinator for the Windsor Essex Catholic District School Board here in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. He's also the current OAME President and Ontario's resident math lessons curator. David has been actively sharing resources on his website and on Twitter for years.
We chat with David about resource sharing, online learning, what his favorite activities are, and how you can get started with them. Stick around for this resource-rich episode. Hit it!
Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are two math teachers who, together,
with you, the community of educators worldwide who want to build and deliver math lessons that spark engagement,
fuel learning,
and ignite teacher action. We can't wait to dive into episode 47 here with David Petro. John, are you ready to get going?
Oh yeah. Before we dive in with our talk with David, we want to thank you for listening to us wherever you are. In the car, at the gym, in the kitchen, washing dishes, or maybe on your prep time. If you've listened to us before and enjoyed the episode and got some value from it, we'd love to hear about it.
Yes, so stop right now and take a picture of what you're doing while you're listening. If you're running, take a breather and take a pic of your route. If you're on a hike, take a pic of your view. If you're cutting the lawn, take a pic of your lawnmower. No, send your yard. Let's see a picture of your beautifully cut grass. We'd love to see where you are, and send that pic to Twitter at MakeMathMoments or on Facebook, facebook.com/MakeMathMoments, or just email us. We absolutely love it when you share and tag us in your experiences the last time we asked. Knowing that you're out there listening to us Canadian boys and knowing that we're making a difference is all we need to keep on plugging away. So go ahead, take that picture and share away.
We chat with David today about lesson curation and how to use social media to broaden your professional learning. If you want to learn more, we encourage you to register for the Make Math Moments Virtual Summit. Yes, that's right. We are running a free online math professional development summit for K-12 educators. The Make Math Moments Virtual Summit is running on Saturday, November 16th and Sunday, November 17th, and will feature sessions from past and upcoming Make Math Moments That Matter podcast guests, Sunil Singh, Dr. Nikki Newton, Skip Fennell, and his team of the formative 5 authors, and many more.
Register for this year's summit at makemathmoments.com/summit.
Listening to this episode after November 17th, 2019, you can still head to makemathmoments.com/summit to add your name to the waitlist for the next Make Math Moments Virtual Summit.
So go ahead, head on over and get yourself registered. makemathmoments.com/summit. makemathmoments.com/summit. All right, I think we're ready to dive into our conversation with David Petro. Hey there, David. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. We are so pumped to have you on the show today. How are things over on the other side of the, get ready for this, people, county? You are only about 30 minutes from John and I. Could probably make a triangle between John's house, my house, and your house. How's things going over there, David?
Yeah, there's definitely a math question in there somewhere. Things are good, guys. Good to be on the show. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
That's fantastic. David, even though we know you quite well, and as Kyle said, we all live within a half an hour of each other, help our listeners understand a little bit about yourself. Where are you located? What's your role? And maybe give us a little background on how you got in the math teacher world.
So I live in little southern Ontario town called Harrow. Harrow has got about 3,000 people in it, and we are home to the oldest real country fair in Canada. And
claim to fame.
Claim to fame, yeah. And I've been teaching for about 25 years. In fact, I got the 25-year service award this year for email from my school board this year. They give you a Rolex watch.
Do you get a pin?
No, you get a Rolex watch,
Yeah.
but it's Rolex with 2 X's.
Right.
And for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've been a consultant at our board. So I've been servicing teachers, supporting them in math, science, and IT. And up until very recently, that's what I was doing. And I'm just starting my new role as a vice principal at a grade 7 and 8 middle school in Windsor. So that's going to be exciting.
Very awesome. When I heard the news there, it sort of, in a way, broke my heart a little bit that you'd be moving out of the math consulting role. Well, actually, as you mentioned, your portfolio actually is quite extensive, math, science, and IT, just those little tiny subject areas, right? So doing quite a bit and then heading into the VP role, super cool. I'm wondering, can you take us through maybe a quick little snapshot? Like, what does your current role, not your VP role, but your current role sort of look like, sound like? I'm always curious to ask this question because different districts and different boards, they have different terms, consultants, coordinators, all of these things, and the roles can be very different. So I'm wondering what might be some of the things that you engage in from day to day?
I don't know that there's a day-to-day. Like, it is different every day. A lot of times you are getting requests from teachers. And I always found that whenever a teacher asked for something, that sort of became my priority, regardless of what my boss or the school board wanted me to do at that time. And in fact, I had to make sort of a list of things I do for the person coming in replacing me. And at first I was like, I don't know that I could write some stuff down. But then eventually I got like 3 pages of stuff and all kinds of things. But, they're at the beginning of the year. The first day of the year for me is kind of weird because it's always been weird because that was always so exciting in a school, that first day of the year. But in the consultant role, you walk to the board office and it's kind of a little laid back. It's not quite the same. But beginning of the year, it's a lot of analyzing provincial test data and starting to brainstorm about the ideas for the next few PD days, and then starting to put in place some of the workshop series that we were doing for teachers. And then it just starts to go from there. It's almost like a steamroller at that point. And then it's June.
Right.
To me, though, I think that the best was being in classrooms, getting to visit teachers in their classrooms, getting to team teach with them, getting to learn what's happening in the classes. And it's sad to say, but I think when you get out of the teaching day-to-day role, you do get, I would say, soft. You lose that edge. And it would be really easy to just sort of coast. You really have to be conscious of the fact that you're supporting these teachers and you've got to work making sure that they have the support that they need. And so that was always a mandate of mine, to make sure that they always had what they needed.
For sure. It sounds an awful lot like what my experience has been in my role as a math consultant in my district. For those listening, our districts actually cover the same geographic region, but we're just 2 separate districts, both publicly funded, and our roles sound to be quite similar. And I have to agree, like, it's kind of funny because on the first day of school, I always find that everybody is there. Like, anyone who has that board role, everyone's there because there's no fires to put out yet.
Right.
Everything's running as smoothly as it can possibly go so far. So superintendents are around, and it's sort of like, they're sort of waiting for that first phone call of something that's happened at a school or whatever it might be. So it's in a way kind of odd because, it seems like the parking lot's full, everybody's there instead of running all over the district, going to different schools. So for me, that's really interesting. I love your point about trying to, I'll call it, stay relevant, right? Like you called it kind of getting soft. Like, the longer you stay out of the classroom, the more, I think, the easier in your mind you can make it to seem like, oh yeah, teaching's not that difficult. Like you can almost play a story in your mind of how things would go if you were in the classroom. So getting into the classrooms, I think, is so important. It can be extremely difficult with the scheduling, but it's so important to get in. And some folks in my department are really good at that, namely Yvette Lehman. She is like big on let's get into multiple classrooms every single week. So oftentimes it makes our schedule crazy, but it's great because we get in there, we screw up a bunch of lessons. Sometimes they go really well, sometimes they don't go really well, but we learn so much in the process. And hopefully that will keep us a little bit sharper, I guess, get less dull over time as we are outside of the classroom.
Yeah, and I know that's going to be different for me in my new role because I have to be at the same place at the same time every day as opposed to some place different and having that autonomy to go where I saw the need. And so it'll be a little bit weird to have to be at a certain place at a certain time every day, exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the way it started, right?
Right. And your role, I have to imagine that being a vice principal of school has got to be one of the toughest jobs in the school. And I'm very interested to hear, we got to check back in with you later and find out how your first semester is going. I think that would be awesome to talk about. David, we want to dive a little bit back. Part of the podcast is we dive into some of the history of the guests we have on the show. And we would love to know the answer to this question about like how you became a teacher. Like, what are the things that led up to that moment where this is where you were going to go? Like I've shared here for me and myself that my family, I come from a teacher, my dad was a math teacher and I kind of followed in his footsteps in a way I never intended to, but I got the teaching bug on a co-op job I had at university and I kind of went down that path. But how did you get into this role?
Well, I never really planned to be a teacher. In fact, I never really planned for anything. The thinking that went into my post-secondary life was very minimal. I remember, so when I was in grade 12, in Ontario, we still had grade 13. And so it was December of grade 12 year, and a friend of mine said, hey, I'm going to university next year. And I said, how can you go to university next year? We still got another year. And so they have this thing called Prelim. You can go to university and take some university courses and finish your high school courses. And I basically said, oh, I think I want to do that. And that was the thought of how I would decide which university to go to and what I would take was that 10-second conversation. And I ended up in engineering and then switched after the first year to physics because I didn't like engineering and I went to physics. And then, at the end of a physics degree, I thought, oh, I think being a scientist might be a good idea. And so I did my master's in physics in atomic and molecular experimental physics. It was interesting because being a scientist, what apparently it meant to me was I would come in, turn my experiment on, collect some data. At the end of the day, download the data and then repeat, analyze the data, yesterday's data while today's data is being collected. And part of my job as a master's student was to teach first and second year labs. And what I found was at the end of 2 years of doing a master's degree, I enjoyed the teaching aspect way more than I enjoyed the research aspect. And that really, really was the thing that steered me in that direction. I mean, I could have easily continued my research to do a PhD, and there was definitely a pathway to working at a jet propulsion lab. That's where a lot of the people went in what I was doing. But the teaching was much more interesting to me at that point. And so I decided, well, I will go to teachers college instead. And that's sort of how that happened, and started out teaching math and science and math and physics. And at that point, really, it seemed like the right thing, the right choice at that point. Although there are little regrets of like, oh, it would have been neat to work at someplace like the Jet Propulsion Lab. I have friends that have experiments going up on the next Mars lander. Like that seems like really exciting. But it's been a pretty good 25 years doing what I'm doing now. I think I did all right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of teachers have similar stories. There are people that say, like, I was going into teaching from the get-go, but I think a lot of people are all like, I kind of stumbled across it and I really enjoyed it. And I really love hearing those stories because they're the passionate teachers. And I also relate to I wasn't going to be a teacher. I was in computer science. I wanted to become a computer science until I had that co-op job where it was like, I just love interacting with these students and helping them along the way. And it changed the course of where I was going. And like you, I had all these students that I was friends with go off and work at Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook. Now they work at Facebook, but not back then. But, it's hear about their lives are different than our lives, but different paths for sure.
I have to confess, I think my motivations for wanting to be a teacher perhaps a little selfish. I
Well,
think
yeah.
in the sense that the thing that drew me to teaching at first was the idea of being the guy that knew it all, the oracle, the giver of knowledge,
Right.
And I think that might have been fine before the internet, but I think teaching is much different now. Or I think what is effective teaching and teaching in that old or traditional style is perhaps not terrible, but we can do better. But that's a whole nother podcast, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think many of us, that's kind of what you pictured, right? Like when we all sort of decided that we wanted to become teachers, whether it was early on or later on, I think that's probably the teacher we were envisioning, right? We weren't envisioning giving kids the opportunity to problem solve and explore and sort of us guiding them along their journey. It was us being there to essentially pave the path for them, right? And you didn't mention it, but going back to you becoming a scientist, I don't know why, but immediately in my head, I was picturing you with like really crazy hair, sticking up and everything like that. Like that must have been hard to let go of, right, David? Like you were like, I'm going to be leaving that hairdo behind and becoming a teacher.
I think he's got it. Like, I don't know, Kyle, if you remember what David looks like here, but once a year he shaves his head and then it starts all over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, David, we want to come back to, again, or I guess continue with your own educational experience, but this time we want to dive into a memorable math moment. When you're thinking about math class, when we say math class, what memorable math moment comes to mind for you? Would you mind sharing?
I know you guys asked that question, and I honestly I had to really think about a moment that was memorable to me. Math class was not, as a student, math class was not really that memorable to me in the sense that it was not particularly challenging. I did very well because I could play the game really well. Mm-hmm. I had very few teachers that I thought I can think of maybe one or two that really, inspired me and made me work harder and want to work harder. But for the most part, it was non-eventful. Although there is one moment, I wouldn't know if I would call it a good moment or a weird moment or a bad moment, but I remember being in grade 12 math class, and the beginning of the year, and the teacher's rule on the syllabus came out that he checked homework every day. And every time you didn't do your homework, you lost 1% of your grade up to 10%. And so within the first 2 weeks, I guess the beginning of the third week, when he came to my desk, having not done homework for 2 weeks, because I never did homework, his comment to me was, Dave, I'm not going to check your homework anymore because you've lost all your homework marks. And I was like, good. Like, I'm glad we have an agreement here because I'm not going to do the homework. And, I showed him when I got a 79 in the course instead of an 89. Boy, did I show him. And in the end, I shrugged my shoulders, and it probably was the course that eventually meant I didn't get honor roll that year for the first time. The real story there was what I left high school with, or what I didn't leave high school with, was a good set of work skills. It may sound like a brag, but I just don't think it was that challenging. But when I went to university, I was not prepared for the rigor of having to teach yourself because the class was moving on, whether you were ready for it or not. And it was a really weird first couple of years of university trying to figure out how to learn all the stuff I should have learned in high school.
It just brings up some great questions actually in my mind about the idea of homework or something like, maybe it's not homework, because for years I would tell kids exactly that, like the kids that were doing their work regularly and self-directed to get that work done. If they were regularly doing work in school and making time for it, they were the ones that, when they went to university, were more ready for that level of commitment. Whereas the students like you were like, I'm pretty bright. I catch on to things very quickly and I can do it once I see it or once I try it. And they go off to university or experience a little bit of that first, oh man, I have to do some work. Like it makes me think like, it's like a struggle that I have in my brain about that. I do recognize those students who catch on very quickly and show me the understanding. And I don't want to penalize them like your teacher penalized you. Like I reward, like you are catching on. I don't need to see any more from you because you prove it time and time again. Like, why do I have to check your homework and take off marks? Like I shouldn't be doing that to you. But then on the other hand, like how would you handle yourself, David, in that situation? Like think back, you're the teacher in that room for a moment. how would you try to teach yourself that lesson of like, we got to do it now? Or do you say like, learn it then? Like, what lesson would you want to give yourself?
Well, so it's interesting because I really didn't remember that so much when I first started teaching that experience until I had my first student, quote, like me, who didn't have to do homework and still did well. And I didn't have a punitive rule like that in terms of losing homework marks at that point. So that wasn't the issue. But when that student came back to me a couple of years later and had the same experience that I had, it was like, oh, right. Okay. I've got to do something different in my class to make sure that doesn't happen to any more of my students. So when I would encounter those students, I would make sure that what I actually gave them was something more challenging, something more interesting and challenging as part of the homework that they would want to do, that they would feel interested in doing, so that they could at least have some of those experiences of like working through a tough problem, of doing something on your own. And not just for those students. I would make sure that all my students had that experience, but I would make sure I would include those experiences in my classes so that everyone had things to do when the work was not challenging for them. And it became more of a goal to make sure kids in my classes were prepared for whatever they were going into. And it was always true. The students who worked the hardest were the ones that did the best in university. I mean, if that's your goal, like not all kids went to university and all kids should go to university, because there are many, many other avenues like apprenticeship or college that are suitable for students. I think too many people use university as this pillar to head off to. And I think teachers also use that as this should be everybody's goal. Not thinking that, there's a lot of great opportunities for students that don't require university and are quite fulfilling and still require a lot of math to be good at. Just making sure that, trying to be self-aware of those students that both struggle and didn't struggle, and making sure I had something for both of them.
I hear this message of differentiation and also just purpose and intentionality behind, like what's the homework there for? And I think we all, at some point in our career, usually when you first begin, you sort of just do things the way you remember them being done to you. And, I would just assign the homework and go from there. And like you, David, I didn't have like a punitive sort of approach, but I did check homework every day, like spent, and maybe I'll call it even like wasted a lot of my class time, me walking student to student, putting down, I remember on a checklist, 1 or 2 or 0, but those were just numbers for me to know how much they're doing their homework. And then I do the whole call home thing. But the difference is that whether there was a 0 or whether there was a 2, some of the kids who had 2s didn't do the homework well. They just did it because they were supposed to. And some of the kids who got 0s were the David Petros of my class, right? Where they were like, I don't need to do this. This wasn't for me. You just assigned it for everyone. And what I'm hearing is that we want to give kids these opportunities to practice purposefully. And with that, that means that we need to definitely modify things for the students who, are at different and various levels. Like, I guess at the end of the day, if a student's thinking like, I've got to get this done because it's on the to-do list of math class, like I'm just going to get this done, then how purposeful really is that? Or could we make it where there's something a little bit more curious or interesting for that student who clearly has the skills that their homework's trying to push or promote? Some students might need those practice questions, but other students maybe need something a little different. So I love that idea of differentiation. So David, the conversation's been great so far, and I want to start maybe shifting our thinking a little bit towards something that I feel I think of every time I see your name on Twitter or every time I see and come across your resources online. I picture you as a curator of math resources. Like, you deliver PD sessions, you do all kinds of different things in the math world. But something that I feel like you are so consistent with is this idea of curating math resources. And one in particular on your blog, ontariomath.blogspot.com, includes all kinds of resources that you tend to share, kind of directed more towards Ontario teachers, however, really applicable for all teachers all over the world. So we're wondering, what got you started sharing resources in mathematics, and in particular, links that would be helpful for your fellow Ontario math teachers?
So it's interesting. It's only very recently that people have referred to me as a curator. And I find that interesting because it's not really what I set out to do. Really, I blame the internet. That's what I blame. I've been really on the internet since I was in university. So I started in 1990 on news groups and things like that when I was doing my master's degree.
I can hear your modem right now in my brain.
Yeah, that familiar sound of the modem. That was like music to my ears. And when I started teaching, I started to see that there were a lot of resources that were on the internet, not necessarily teachers that were sharing stuff, but things that I would come across that hey, I could probably make a math problem out of that. That is something that could relate to this topic in mathematics. And I would just start, collecting them, saving links as you do, or I did back then. And at some point, of course, our school board invoked email. And I think I started to, every time I found something useful that I thought for math class, I would share it with my math department. I'd say, hey, I saw this online and you might want to use it. And it turned out that I was sharing things almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day, just because I was addicted to the internet. In my free time, I just loved getting into new information. It wasn't until somebody kind of accused me of spamming them, because I was sending out so many emails. I was like a serial sharer. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll send out one email to my department a week. I'll send out on a Friday. Here's all the things I found this week that you could probably use in math class. And I would just send that out to my department. And I did that for many, many years, whatever it be. I would just sort of keep this email open at the beginning of the week. And as I found things, I would put them in there. And then on Friday, I would just click send. And I think it might have been around 2012. And honestly, I don't know if people were even reading these emails. I think at some point they were like, yep, trash. Yep, trash. From Petro, yeah, trash.
That's what I was going to ask. It was did you get any response? Would people email you back saying awesome, thank you very much? Or was it just you had no idea what was happening on the other end?
Well, occasionally, because it was going to my department, we would actually have physical conversations, because we sat next to each other. I think for many years, I don't know how, it may be still true. I think teachers still teach in silos, door closed. You don't really know what's going on in somebody else's classes. So honestly, I got some feedback from some teachers, that was cool or whatever, but I don't know if they ever used it. But it didn't matter to me. I wasn't really doing that. That was how I was sort of keeping track of the things that I found. And I thought, well, since I'm finding these things, I'll just let these other people know about them. If they want to use them, they can use them. If not, it doesn't really take any more time for me to make this email. So it wasn't that big of a deal to me, whether they use them or not. And I think even now I am not I don't really crave that, thanks for that. I just here's stuff. And so then I think around 2012, I think I started thinking that, oh, well, maybe I can, instead of do this as an email, I can do this as a blog. And instead of sending an email out every week, I will just post a blog about the stuff I found and just say a few things about it. And that really became a reason for me to keep track of the links, because I was using at the time Delicious to keep track of my links, which was really great because you could tag them with different tags. But that was sort of not being maintained, or the site was being transferred from hands to hands. And there's a thinking that I might lose all my links. I had 2,500 links on Delicious, all about math.
You had the internet in your Delicious account.
I was just basically saved the whole internet to my Delicious account. So I just thought if I put the right keywords in and I can put some description in, I can always search my blog if I'm looking for something. And so that's what I did. I just started making a blog post. And honestly, like I said, it was just for me to keep track of links. But because it was a blog, hey, I can share this out to people. And if they find something useful on it, then great. And yeah, Kyle, you said that it is sort of geared towards Ontario, but only in the sense of some of the tagging. On every link, I sort of put a thing called curriculum tags, and I just link that to the Ontario courses that this link, I think that link might relate to.
Right.
But it turns out that if you teach math in Canada or in the United States or in Zimbabwe, math is the same.
The universal language.
That's right. And so I think anybody could use the links that are there and recognize what courses
Right.
that they teach that they fit into.
Right.
So yeah, honestly, it's a thing for me that I just share with everyone else. And it's not a lot of work. I still publish every Friday. I've published every Friday since I started.
I was just looking back on your oldest
Maybe
post
only-
just now, and your oldest post on the site is 2012, which you had 2, and then 2013 jumps to 49 posts. So you went right.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a little lazy in the
and then
summer
everything
that
after
year.
that is 52.
And one of the reasons we thought it would be great to bring you on, because you're the curator and you're doing all of this hard work for everyone else. I think this is a great opportunity for people listening and to hear the reasons why you did it. And you had mentioned earlier about the idea that, sometimes we're kind of selfish. It's not like you just woke up one day and were like, I'm going to create this blog for everyone else. It was more to keep things organized for yourself. And when I read your posts each week, because I see them hit my Twitter feed, so I always take a look and often I'm sharing them out. When I look at that, I think of what a great opportunity it is for your own personal reflection, really just to sit and think about these different resources. Like, I've got to assume that by you doing this process, even though it doesn't take you a whole lot of time and you're not worried about sending it to an editor to read through it, you're literally just putting on kind of like your first thought about this task or this idea or this visual or whatever it is you're sharing. And it gives you an opportunity to kind of put it into your long-term memory instead of just sort of seeing it. Like, I see so many things online, but because I don't take the time to do anything with it, it's like, oh yeah, I'll come back or I'll just Google it if I want it again. Well, I probably will forget it exists and it will never sort of cross my mind ever again unless I bump into it again. So like, do you find that this process, do you find that you get that sort of reflective element out of it as well in order to help you realize that, hey, there is a resource for that and I could just go back to my blog and quickly fire in one of those tags?
That's interesting because I think if I was just bookmarking them to some bookmarking site, which I did for many years, I think the difference in what I'm doing now and making this blog is that writing the 2 or 3 lines of my little summary of what this thing is, which again is just for me, that really kind of helps to solidify the idea of this thing in my head so that even though it's 2019, I think I remember seeing something that had, somebody jumping a bike over a canyon. I probably wrote about that in my blog. And I did because it sticks in memory more, I think, when you actually try to engage a little bit on the link as opposed to, that looks neat, click, save, done.
Yeah.
That's easy. But I think that little act of just writing a brief summary makes it stick just a little bit better. And so I don't have to remember where that link was or what that link, I just have to remember when I type my description to put enough descriptive words in there so that if I type in motorcycle jump into the search, it's going to pull up. I would have definitely put that in the description.
I totally agree because my math blog has evolved over different ways throughout its lifetime. And I first did it as a way to communicate to students what we did that day and what the task at home might be. And then that evolved into when I wrote lessons. Like I was like, I did a great lesson here. I'm going to write a blog post because I'd seen people writing teacher blogs and I'm like, hey, I can do this too. But for me, it was like what you said. I wrote that blog post up, that lesson up, as a reminder of what I did for myself for the next time that I wanted to do that, what I did. And again, on a blog, you can share that with whoever you want and get some feedback on it. But like you, it was kind of selfish in a way that it was just a way for me to remember it and reflect on it. And then think about, you just said about the act of writing it down helps our memory solidify it a little bit more. Like that did it for you, did it for me. But, our students, that can work the same way. And like, what kind of consolidation are we doing at the end of lessons lately? Like, are we having our kids write down reflections on what they've learned? I've been in the last couple of years really concerned and diving into that area more. Like, what does the end of lessons or activities or tasks look like? Because I think there's a lot of value in reflecting on our own learning as we're going on that. I think Kyle has some words to say on that topic too.
Yeah, I think for many people, if like people we bump into all the time, whether it's conferences or so on and so forth, like the people we associate with online oftentimes are people on social media. And often you'll notice people on social media who are actively sharing math resources and those types of things oftentimes have some sort of blog. And the idea, I think, for the majority of the people we bump into is much like what David shared with us today, which is they were like, how do I reflect? I was the type of person, I didn't like reflecting, on my own computer, or even when I was doing some education courses, some additional qualification courses. I started like sharing my actual assignments on a blog because I felt like it was just me and the instructor who were reading it. So I said, why not put it out here? And it actually put a little bit of extra pressure on me to make sure it made sense. Whereas I was the type of kid in school, and I remember this from all the way into early elementary, where I always was the kid on the report card who would say, rushes through, doesn't reread, doesn't edit, all of these things. I would just go bleh and put it out there. And I felt like a little bit of this, I guess, pressure that anyone in the entire world could read what I was putting out there. And what I found when I started doing the same thing John was doing, I was essentially just posting initially of what the homework was, and what we did. I would do like a brief paragraph or even just a couple points about what we did that day. Oftentimes through that process, when I was like, how come I can't come up with a good brief description of what we did today? It made me reflect on whether the lesson was very helpful at all. Like you're sitting there trying to summarize the lesson that you planned, you delivered, and now you're trying to summarize it for a student, assuming they weren't there in class that day. And I'm going like, if I can't summarize it, I wonder what the kids are doing right now. Like, I wonder if they would be able to explicitly tell me what the lesson was about or whether they just went through the motions. So that really helped me anyway in my planning and my refinement. So those first times through were not so great, but by reflecting, I could refine things over time. So I find this process, whether it's sharing links or whether it's reflecting on lessons, just this idea of kind of putting it out there really forces you to do a little bit more thinking than maybe you might do when you individually reflect.
Well, I think being part of the math Twitter blogosphere, the blogging world now, as it were, I think that it can be very intimidating for teachers to think that, anyone can see what I'm put down here, and that can be the end for them. They're just not willing to do that, or to put themselves out there. And I get that. But I like to tell teachers that this process of creating a blog post about your lesson or something, even if it's just like things that you like, you can still do that on a blog and make the blog private just for you. And you still go through that process and you still have all that information. You don't necessarily have to share it out with everyone. Maybe you'll get to that point where you'll feel comfortable with it. But honestly, the process alone is the thing that's important. I think back to when I was still teaching in the classroom, and I would give the students a quarter sheet of paper, and I would say, you can write down any formulas that you want and bring this on the test or on the exam. Some teachers really, thought that was, why are you letting them do that? They should remember. But I was like, honestly, the kids that really took that to heart and wrote down the stuff, that process of writing it down was, for some of those kids, the only studying that they did. And in fact, those kids that made those sheets often never referred to them because they didn't have to. That process of making that summary is so important. And to circle back around to this idea of consolidating a lesson, just thinking about how useful, and I say useful in quotes, it is for just students to sit there and have you copy down what you're copying on the board as a consolidation. It's not their words that they're copying down. It's your words that you want them to have in their notes. And I don't know how you can measure whether kids can quietly copy stuff down, and you're satisfied that you've done your job as a teacher because, hey, they copied those notes down that I wrote down, and they're pretty good notes. I wrote them. But I don't know how many kids even refer back to those notes or internalize them, because you can copy down notes very mechanically without even thinking about what they mean.
Right. Think about those like times where I don't know if this happens to you, but I'll be reading a page and I'll all of a sudden start thinking about something else, and I've gone through the whole page. I didn't even know what I wrote or read. It's like, I got to go read that again because I was off in la la land there thinking about what was on TV or something. But I think the same thing can be true for kids copying notes. They could mindlessly just be writing words down, but not putting them together to make any sense of them.
And why wouldn't they? If that's what school has been for 10, 12 years, a good student is going to be good at copying notes. I can robotically read what is on the board or the overhead or the PowerPoint or whatever happens to be and put that in my notes and move on. And the teacher gives me the nod. I did well.
For sure. I had that down to a T. That's what saved me in secondary. In elementary, I was, my approach reminded me of what you referenced, David, of, I just could kind of show up and be okay. But in high school, it was like things were getting a little harder for me. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just write these things we call notes down and that will do the trick. And basically all I would do is rewrite the notes and I would be able to sort of regurgitate the whole note. But as soon as anything changed, I was done, right? So it's like notes are important, but I think it's so much more important for the words on that page to be reflective of what the student's thinking in their mind, right? So, and that's challenging to do, like as a teacher, to try to get kids to find the value, like to see the value that we now see. So that for me is important. What we're wondering though, David, so you're on the show here. We're talking about you as a curator, but again, we're all three of us are talking about essentially how we're all pretty selfish curators. We're doing this for our own learning, and we're also helping by sharing with others. But I'm going to argue that if somebody goes onto your blog and they just say, hey, I'm just going to follow David's blog and I'm going to just read what David says, they might not get the full picture of what you might want to use with those resources, or you might not even remember those resources exist, as we mentioned before. So that reflective process is really important. So if I'm someone listening and I'm going, okay, I like how David's got this structured, maybe I want to start doing something like this. Where are some of your favorite places to bump into? I always say bump into math resources because I'm sure it's more like that. It's not like you sit down for 20 minutes a week and then just go and find all your links. You kind of bump into them along the way. Like, how do we get beyond using, say, social media for being used just for like cat photos and memes to actually using them for finding really rich mathematical resources, be it tasks or visuals? Where are you going? Where are you seeing that people should be jumping to in order to dive into this process?
The reason the blog is, or even keeping the links is really important is because you never know, and you use the word stumble upon, because I think that's what it is. I've always found that if I got an idea, I think I need to find something for this topic. That's always sort of frustrating to me because you find stuff, I want to teach quadratics, I'll find all kinds of lessons or whatever it happens to be, but like that cool thing is not always easy to find. And so the idea of making sure you're in circles where you might see some things is really important. And I can't say enough how Twitter has really affected my teaching practice in a good way. The community of math teachers on Twitter is just amazing. I know that there's definitely in the general population not good feelings about Twitter. There's lots of bad stuff that happens on there. But in the math community, I can't speak enough about how teachers share what they do, what they think, how they've experienced good and bad on Twitter. And that's really been a really great source of information for me. And I don't see Twitter as a place I go to look for specific things either. I just check in maybe once a day, if that. And it's just a stream of ideas. But, when you see something and it catches your eye, that's when it goes, save that link, goes on the blog, and I'll use it when I need to. I don't need it right now. I'm just sort of keeping a list of things. But what I have found most useful on Twitter, if I could extend that idea, is because people don't always share resources on Twitter. They might share ideas or comments, and there's still a fair bit of conversation on Twitter.
So say I'm a new teacher and I create a new Twitter account. Like, is it just all going to come to me? How does Twitter know I'm a math teacher?
Well, there's so many nuances to this, right? Because, the way Twitter works, if you've got to start to follow people to start to see things in your feed, right? And so, you have to sort of find a group of people to follow. And there's certainly a fair bit of people that are out there. And if you even if you just type in math in the search, you'll find some stuff. Although I will caution you against, a lot of people hate math, as it turns out. Surprising, I know.
Who knew?
And they will tell you about it on Twitter. And an important piece of the Twitter puzzle is the use of, I think, the use of a hashtag.
Right.
Because to me, when you use a hashtag in your tweet, you're basically telling the world in one word what this tweet is about or what this tweet relates to, and it becomes something that you can search. And when I first got on Twitter, I started looking at the hashtag math, and that's where I really found that a lot of people don't like math, but quickly found that there are some math hashtags that were just about education. And without following many people, you can actually, in the Twitter search, or if you want to get a little high tech, use something like TweetDeck, you can follow a hashtag, and something like math chat, for example, is what I first started to follow. And if math chat was in somebody's tweet, that pretty much guaranteed that that tweet was something about education and mathematics. Once I started following that hashtag, that was like 2009-ish, the wealth of stuff that would just come across my feed was amazing. And then you start to find people that are consistently tweeting about math all the time. You see the same names come up, and then you say, oh, okay, I think I might just follow that person. And if you do a mix of people and hashtags, and don't go into it thinking that I'm going to find everything I need. You're not necessarily going to find everything you need. I think if you go into it thinking, I'm going to find some stuff that I like, and maybe someday I'll use it, then great. And then the extra bonus is you start to develop relationships with these people that you've never met before, because you start to have some conversations about your teaching practices, and you start to see their conversations about their teaching practices, and you start to see how people reflect publicly about what they do and what strengths that can bring to your own classroom. And it turns out that that is really where some of the power is in a social media platform like Twitter. And as long as I think you're not too worried about your presence, in the sense that, what if people don't like my post? Or what if I don't have a lot of followers? And I think that's some of the downfalls of social media, is that sort of status sort of thing. Then you can actually get quite a bit out of something like Twitter. Because, I think there are a lot of teachers who are sharing great ideas just because they can. And that becomes a catalyst for something else in their classrooms. That idea of sharing something is a really great way to start to really introspectively look at what you're doing in your own classroom.
You've covered a lot of ground there, David. I think one of the things that you did a good job articulating is just this idea of you don't have to go on Twitter and act like the Kardashians, sharing everything about your life, from what you eat to where you are and all of these different things. Like, there's almost like a bit of a continuum from what I call like lurker to sharer. Right? David, you're clearly on the sharer side of things, but I'm going to guess that maybe you weren't on the sharer side when you first began on Twitter. I know for me, I started in the lurker space, and I'm going to suggest that probably most people get into any type of social media, and you're more of a lurker. You're kind of like feeling it out, like what's going on here. And there's nothing wrong with going on Twitter or going on any social media channel, whatever you choose, whether it's Pinterest or Instagram or whatever it might be. Twitter just happens to be a great place for math resources. You could be on there and it's like you're not there. Like, you don't have to have people even knowing that you're around. Obviously, they'll know if you start following. I create an account. I start following David. I follow John. I follow all kinds of different people in the math space. They're going to see that you've followed them. But even if they click on your account, they're not going to see anything because you haven't posted anything yet. And I would argue that if that's a concern of yours listening at home, that's where I would suggest starting. You could even create what they call like a private account where people can't actually see whatever you do post. So if you're not posting, you don't really need to worry about that. But if, let's say, you are, you can make it private and then only let people into your space that you'd like. So I would say, like, get started there, start following some people. And then the other thing that I think is really key is not feeling like David mentioned he's on there maybe once a day, but you don't have to set yourself a schedule. Like, you don't have to go and see everything that's on Twitter. It's like trying to see everything on the internet. Google doesn't give you this feed where you log into the internet and all this stuff just keeps appearing on your browser. But with Twitter, it does. So that could be really overwhelming. I know some people get kind of stressed. They're like, how do I see it all? And the answer is, you'll never be able to see it all, right? So you want to make sure that you're not putting this pressure on yourself, like you have to cover everything or you have to see everything. That's not really what it's all about. It's there, and you kind of come in and out of conversations as you go along. So I don't know if you have any other of those tips there, David, before we talk about, I guess, a couple other places people can find resources, and then we'll be wrapping up shortly after that. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what you've said is right on the money in terms of starting as a lurker. And I think you can seriously have FOMO with Twitter because it's just a continuous feed of information. If you follow a lot of people, your feed is going to be filled and going by quick, and you may feel like you need to see it all. And I think what's important is there are things that you can do to help make sure some of the good stuff is at the top of your feed most of the time. When you're on Twitter, your first interaction might be to like a post, to like a tweet, right? And that might be your first step away from being a lurker. And that's great. That tells the person who posted it, hey, I liked what you said there. I liked what you shared. Thanks a lot. It puts it into your list of likes. And that's a really great place to start. The problem is if you like a lot of stuff, there's no way to sort that. If you're liking it so you can keep track of it later and you like a lot of things, you can't really sort your likes in Twitter. And honestly, if you like something, you and the person who posted that are really the only people that see that. And as I said earlier, I'm a serial sharer. And so I think one of the things that you can do to help the Twitter community and to help yourself is to start to, you don't have to make posts or make tweets, but if you like something, then you might actually want to consider retweeting it, right? Rather than just hitting the like button, hit the retweet button. And what that does is now it goes to the top of the Twitter feed. And if a lot of people retweet something, it goes to the top of the Twitter feed, and it's more likely that other people are going to get an opportunity to see that thing and don't have to search through their Twitter feed because it goes to the top. And it's literally a click on your part. You don't really have to think about it, but you benefit because it acts like a bookmark, just like the like does. It just shows up in a different part of your Twitter feed. The tweeter gets their stuff shared again, and everyone else gets a chance to see it one more time. So, that ability to retweet is a really simple way to start to contribute to the Twitter community. I think that's a really, really great way to begin. You don't have to necessarily share something that you found, although that could be something that you do. And then, the next step is to actually comment on something, to start that conversation about the thing that tweet was about. And that conversation might lead to an interaction that goes on for several tweets and help you take that idea and hone it in your head and to argue it back and forth with that person. And then you're actually gaining a little bit more insight into what you believe. So the next step is to comment. And then you might get to the point where you actually create your own tweet and you actually share something that you found, an original idea or something that you saw, a news article that you thought was relevant to teachers. And that's a great idea. That's sort of that final step of Twitter. And my only suggestion there, if you want your tweet to have a little bit more visibility for people, add an image to it so it stands out a little bit. But more importantly, include some hashtags to let people know what it's about. Math chat is one that is still one of my favorites. Or if you're in Britain, you might do maths chat. But more recently, MTBOS, the math Twitter blogosphere, that hashtag basically says, hey, I'm a math teacher. This is definitely about math. You might be interested in this. And then even more recently than that, the hashtag I teach math. Those are things that you can include. And that way, people who are not following you, but maybe following hashtags, will see your tweet. It gives it more visibility. And then the last thing you can do to tweet, you can tag some people who you think might be interested in it. And all those things can sort of take you out from being a lurker. And you don't have to go right to that place at the end where you post something, but you can slowly move into a place where you're actually part of a contributing member to that community. And it's not really painful. It's actually quite easy to do.
Those are some great tips. And speaking about the math Twitter blogosphere, is another good tip would be a lot of teachers will put their website if they have a blog or a resource page that they're sharing, right in the Twitter profile. And so if you are following one of those hashtags that David just mentioned, and like he said, there's that teacher that seems to be sharing a lot regularly, you can check to see if they have a web page. Click that web page, and then that will lead them to their blog where they have detailed lessons or detailed activities, and you can learn a lot right from there. So that's where the Math Twitter blogosphere comes from. It's kind of like Twitter is the sharing space, but then kind of like where you branch out from there is going to their blog to continue the conversation or read more about that particular resource that you're finding. I know another good resource for me lately has been Facebook. I've been on Facebook for a while now, but I'd never used it for math. Like Twitter was math, Facebook was kind of personal, but lately there's a lot of great sharing going on in Facebook, especially with Facebook groups. And similarly to what David there said was, like when you're on Twitter, some of the things that you like will show up on your feed more regularly. Same with Facebook. If you like a page or get into a math group, then some of those posts will just show up in your Facebook feed, which you might be just looking at stuff to kill some time when you have some downtime. And then all of a sudden you might run across a Facebook post that shares, again, like the Twitter post. They have resources or maybe a discussion that could be of interest to you. Any more to add there, David, before we wrap up?
Well, you mentioned blogs, and that is a whole nother area that you can certainly go into. I literally follow hundreds of teachers' blogs. That can be overwhelming, but if you use a tool like Feedly, for example, as a newsreader, you can manage those things and only read them as you go. And because I can look at them, if I'm sitting at the doctor's office, I can pull up my Feedly on my phone and read a couple blog posts and, move along. You actually see a whole nother, more detailed view of Twitter. It's like Twitter expanded when you read some of the blogs and start to increase your blog roll and of people that you follow there.
Right. I think that's such a great share. We'll definitely include Feedly in the resources. We'll add a link there. And just to kind of describe it in one sentence for people, it's like taking people's blogs and then the titles appear almost like a Twitter feed. So you kind of get like a little bit of a snapshot. And then when somebody adds a new blog post, it appears at the top of your Feedly feed. So very cool. But again, starting anywhere you feel most comfortable. The key is, I think, just to get started. And I'm so happy that we had an opportunity to bring David onto the podcast, because we know that David is definitely I hate using the word master, but I feel like a master of finding and curating and sharing resources. He's also does some great workshops on how to get started with finding resources online on that thing we call the internet. So as we're about to wrap up here, David, where can we find more about David Petro? Where can people find more about you? And we will add all of them to the show notes.
So you've already mentioned Ontario Math links. So ontariomath.blogspot.com. That's sort of where I put my weekly posts on there. But also on that site, I feel like we need to mention, since we're on a podcast, I've been listening to podcasts for many years. And so I've actually curated a list of podcast and radio episodes that go back almost, more than a decade, that all relate somehow to teaching math. So there's a page on that blog that deals with that. I'm certainly on Twitter at David Petro 314. And I do have a couple of blogs as well that I actually create activities and work on. So Engaging Math is one. So engaging-math.blogspot.com, where we've got me and the woman I work with, Giselle Jobin, we've created almost 160, 170 activities, from paper and pencil to Desmos to WebSketch, all kinds of things that are there. I have my pet blog. I love data. And so I've been collecting good data sets that could be used in any data management class. And that's another blog called founddata.blogspot.ca. I think these are all .cas. And so I find a good data set, I put it up there. So if you're looking for some good data to use or interesting data to use in your data management, your statistics class, that could be a place where you might want to look.
When I heard you say it was your pet blog, I was thinking, I'm like, he is going to talk about cats from the internet. But no, it's a found data blogspot. We will definitely include all those. And John and I want to give you a shout out for your OAME Talks. You mentioned that you have a podcast page. One of the podcasts I hope that you've included is your own from the OAME OAME Talks is the name of the podcast. I'm going to let you describe it a little bit here, David. What's the intent behind that podcast? And obviously, people can find it on iTunes and all other platforms, but tell us a little bit about what's the premise behind that podcast.
The OAME, that is the Ontario Association for Mathematics Education. And so that's our provincial math association for teachers. And this year, I happen to be president of that association. And one of the mandates that I had was trying to leverage social media and the internet and also provide interesting things for our members to look at. So that the podcast, which we just started, I think only has 4 or 5 episodes. We'll be starting the second season in September, is me just doing some quick interviews with people that have presented at our annual conference, talking about their presentations at the conference in lead up to an online presentation that they do later on. So it's sort of an informal conversation with the presenters. You and John were on the inaugural episode, and we've had Marion Small and Fawn Nguyen and others. And it's interesting. I feel like almost everyone has their own podcast now. There's just so many coming out. But it's all really good stuff. And these conversations that we can have about the practice of teaching math, I think are so useful. And I have to commend you guys. The conversations that you have on this podcast are very insightful to hear about how people are going about their own teaching practice, not just the ones where you have the quote, the big names, but the actual, in the trenches teachers who are talking about their teacher practices. I think those conversations are some of the best things that I've heard on this podcast. So good on you guys.
Well, David, we definitely don't want to take up too much of your time in this summer. We know that you're quite busy. I think you're putting a roof on your house today. So
I'm literally walking up the ladder as I hang up the phone here.
All right. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the summer and a good start at your new role as VP.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. We'll talk to you soon, David. Take care.
Bye-bye.
We want to thank David again for spending some time with us here in the Make Math Moments community to share his insights with all of us. We definitely had some big takeaways.
As always, how will you reflect on what you've heard from this episode? Have you written ideas down, drawn a sketch note, sent out a tweet, called a colleague? Be sure to engage in some form of reflection to ensure that the learning sticks.
Did you enjoy the learning from today's episode? We sure did, and we want to keep on learning. So we encourage you to register for the Make Math Moments Virtual Summit. Yes, that's right. We're running a free online math professional development summit for K through 12 educators. The Make Math Moments Virtual Summit is running on Saturday, November 16th and Sunday, November 17th, 2019, and will feature sessions from past and upcoming Making Math Moments That Matter podcast guests. Currently, Sunil Singh, Dr. Nikki Newton, Skip Fennell and his team from the Formative 5 authors, and many, many more.
Register for this year's summit at makemathmoments.com/summit. Listening to this episode after November 17th, 2019, you can still head to makemathmoments.com/summit to add your name to the wait list for the next Make Math Moments Virtual Summit.
Go ahead, head on over to makemathmoments.com/summit.
In order to ensure you don't miss out on our new episodes as they come out each Monday morning, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or on your favorite podcast platform.
Also, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share the podcast with a colleague and help us reach a wider audience by leaving us a review on iTunes. And tweet us your biggest takeaway while also tagging @MakeMathMoments on Twitter.
Show notes and links to resources from this episode can be found at makemathmoments.com/episode 47. Again, that's makemathmoments.com/episode 47.
Well, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And high fives for you.